Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my pleasure today to welcome Rabbi Danny Mirvis, who is the deputy CEO of World Mizrachi. He's also the rabbi of Ohel Moshe Synagogue in Herzliya Pituach. Born in Dublin, London raised, Rabbi Mirvis is an alum of Yeshivat Har Etzion, and also he served for 6 years in Australia as the senior rabbi of Mizrachi in Melbourne before coming back to Israel. It's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Mirvis. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rabbi Matanki, and good afternoon to you now. And it's a pleasure to join you and your community.
Thank you. So let me get started with the first topic on the agenda, because you've been spending a lot of time preparing for Yom Ha'atzmaut this coming year, the 75th anniversary, and in particular, for the World Orthodox Israel Congress that's going to be taking place on the 2 days after Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Thursday and Friday. What is the World Orthodox Israel Congress?
Well, the 75th Yom Ha'atzmaut is a tremendous opportunity for us to present a unique opportunity for people to be in Israel for this historic event, to commemorate the 75th Yom HaZikaron, and to be there with us and so many others to celebrate the 75th Yom Ha'atzmaut. And given this auspicious occasion and milestone, we thought this would be a great opportunity for us to convene the Israel-supporting Orthodox world, our many affiliates and organizations, and people who view themselves as being part of the religious Zionist modern Orthodox spectrum. That means different things in different places. And the World Orthodox Israel Congress is going to be a very focused, practical Congress with representatives of hopefully 1,000 organizations around the world coming together to discuss the issues of today, with the aim being that post the Congress, we will have a stronger framework, connections, and groups to really continue as a global movement, stronger together.
Do you have any idea yet how many people are actually going to be coming?
Oh, I check a few times a day. At the moment, let's say formally actually signed up that we know and people were expecting to come across the 4 days, let's say it's around 700 at the moment, not including youth delegates, meaning gap year students, of which there'll be many hundreds as well. And with 6 weeks to go, and we haven't yet sent out our Israel invitations, I'm very confident it's going to be a very significant crowd. I'm not worried at all about the numbers. I want to make sure the right people are there. I'm not worried about that either. There are many significant leading people like Rabbi Matanki who are going to be joining us in Yerushalayim. But the real effort now is to raise the bar even one step higher in terms of the level of representation and the content, that this could be a real practical event. For us, this isn't just about an experience. It's about really creating something meaningful and practical. And whoever attends to represent their community can return to their community with greater knowledge and connections, and hopefully more empowered to do their role.
Now, recently you rejoined Mizrachi as the assistant CEO, or the deputy CEO of the World Mizrachi. World Mizrachi has undergone a rebirth and a revitalization. What attracted you to coming back from being a senior Rav and doing so many things in Australia to leaving those kind of positions where you're the number one to be a partner with Rabbi Doron Perez in building the Mizrachi movement and the World Mizrachi movement?
Well, that's a great question, and I can answer it in numerous ways. Let me start at the end. I'm very, very happy to be Rabbi Lawrence Perez's deputy, Rabbi Doron Perez's deputy. Our relationship started before he was Rabbi Doron Perez. Rabbi Perez is absolutely incredible, and he has led an almost process of Tchiyat HaMeitim to the World Mizrachi movement since his arrival here 8 years ago from South Africa. He's brought newfound relevance and energy, and he's really galvanized our global community. I feel like we're a startup that's 121 years old, because we have all the energy and vision and momentum of a startup, but still that great history behind us. And I'll be very happy to always be his number two. I don't have to be the number one. What would have attracted me to that? First of all, before my first date with my wife, Althea, we made a deal. We were introduced by common friends. And I said, this is only relevant if I could be a rabbi outside Israel. And she said, it's only relevant if we're going to live in Israel. So we reached a deal that up to 6 years outside Israel, if it works out. So it was almost exactly 6 years after we left for Australia that we completed our term in Australia and we came back to Israel. We always knew we would be coming back to Israel, and Israel was home. And within that, I was truly blessed to have the World Mizrahi opportunity come along, which, although I'm living in Israel, which isn't a sacrifice, it's incredible, it's an ideal, it still provides me a platform to be engaged with diaspora Jewry as well.
And in terms of that engagement with diaspora Jewry, do you have any sense of the impact in terms of numbers of people that Mizrahi has, the World Mizrahi has, with people around the world?
In terms of representatives, or in terms
of programming, the outreach? If we like numbers nowadays.
Yeah, it's something which is difficult. No, I hear what you're asking. It's something which is difficult to measure. Certainly, anybody in the educational field, it's difficult to really measure your impact. We know about the tens of thousands of people who'd be receiving the HaMizrahi magazine, and therefore we can measure readership to a certain extent of that. We know that at any given time, there are about 600 or so shlichim from the different religious Zionist organizations who are out there in the field. I think there are many people who may not call themselves Mizrahi or define themselves as Mizrahi, but feel part of our ideology and identify with what we believe in. And certainly one of our aims now is post this conference that more people would view us as their ideological home and perhaps their organizational home as well. Not to be an umbrella organization, but somewhere where people can feel that we can help them with their roles. So it's difficult to provide exact numbers, but it's an important way for us to measure our success and our continued success.
Now, I'm sorry for a tough question, but right now, Bezalel Smotrich is in the United States, and there are people who are meeting with him and people who are not meeting with him. People not meeting with him, unfortunately, are many more, because I say unfortunately because it's divisive when people will not meet with a minister in the Israeli government. His party, he named Tzionut Hadatit. He didn't ask Mizrahi in advance whether or not he can name it. He just named it Tzionut Hadatit. And Mizrahi is always known as the religious Zionist movement. Has this created challenges for the upcoming Congress? Has this created challenges for outreach of World Mizrahi?
Let's say as follows. It is undeniable that there is a level of controversy around the religious Zionist party. It's something which you must be sensing at the moment in America and is sensed elsewhere in the world. And I would say it provides us with World Mizrahi with not a challenge, but an opportunity and a role to explain who we are and what we represent. There will be many people for whom they'd view it as a natural alignment with the religious Zionist party, and many people would feel somewhat uncomfortable with that alignment. We did once have a formal political party. No longer. The Mafdal is Alav HaShalom. And there are different schools of thought. There are those who would say that because religious Zionism is a concept and an idea which is far greater than any particular political party, it's important that we have friends in every political party. And we as Mizrahi need to have people who we work with across the political spectrum, both in the government and in the coalition and in the opposition as well. There are those who would say that's very nice and idyllic, but if you don't have a particular party as your champion pushing your cause, then you don't really have an Abba or an Imma in the Knesset. So there is an element of debate at the moment. Certainly, there are many, many people. If you asked about Mizrahi's global impact, there are many, many people who would fall under the broad Mizrahi umbrella, who would not feel comfortable with identifying with the religious Zionist party. And I want them to know that Mizrahi is their home as well. We are not tied to any particular political party. I don't think we'd be promoting BDS against any Israeli government minister. It's a complex and developing situation, not just for Mizrahi, but in Israel as well, as the political landscape is somewhat changing here, and people are trying to work out where exactly they belong and how best to serve the needs of the different constituencies.
Well, I believe in Israel also nowadays that in the most recent elections, there were more people who identify with religious Zionism who voted for parties that are the more traditional parties, whether it's a Likud or something else, then they would vote specifically with something that is identified as a religious Zionist party.
So, if I think about, there's a member of my shul, Chaver Knesset Yuli Edelstein, who comes Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, and he comes to Shiurim, and if he's not dressed properly, smartly, his tzitzit are hanging out. And on Rosh Chodesh, he wears a white shirt, and he wears a kippah sruga, and he made Aliyah to Gush Etzion, And he's not a member of the religious Zionist party, but is he not a religious Zionist hero? Religious Zionism as a concept and an idea is far greater than one party. The Hebrew word for party, miflaga, comes from pilug, division. And perhaps we have a role now more than ever to help create a sense of unity in Am Yisrael. But it's not straightforward and it's not easy. And there are those on the different sides of how best we need to approach this situation.
And going back to your shul for a minute, how do you find the differences between the shul you have today in Herzliya Pituach versus the shul you ran in Melbourne? The role of a rabbi, how different is it?
There are some commonalities, but it could also be Havdel Shamayim va'aretz. I'm not going to tell you which one is Shamayim and which one is Aretz, but I was blessed with the most exceptional 6 years in Melbourne, Australia, an incredible opportunity in the most wonderful community, really amazing people, fantastic chesed, and it was a platform to be involved in many areas of Jewish life, whether it was through the school or the multiple shuls or the Melbourne Eruv or the Melbourne Beit Din, which sat on our premises, or Kosher Australia, which belongs to Mizrahi Melbourne, or a role in the Rabbinical Council, or key work with the government when it came to COVID, or securing the Chevra Kadisha. It was a really wonderful opportunity, which more than anything was about the people, which was really wonderful. And here as well in Israel, I have a tremendous opportunity with a wonderful community, which is also about the people. The role of a rabbi in Israel is very different, and the role of the shul is different. People in Israel, certainly not Israelis, do not necessarily look to their shul as the defining point of their Jewish identity. I would say that when you're living in Israel, you have more points of connection to your Jewish identity than just the shul. And for many people, the shul is where you daven no more. There's little expectation in my shul at the moment from the Israelis for me to say anything at all of a political nature or about what's going on in the country, because they don't view my role or the shul's role as being part of their broader identity necessarily. The Anglos, and there are many olim in my community, are wondering, what's our rabbi going to say about what's going on in Israel? And they would view the shul as more of a representative part of their identity. They would view my role as being a little bit more ceremonial than the Israelis. And I've got the different constituencies within my shul. So that's one significant difference. I'd say another difference in Israel as well is that everything is political. It's impossible to avoid politics in Israel. It's something which I'm learning and I'm trying to work out for myself. But there's almost nothing I can say in shul which doesn't have a political element to it. And that's something which we're learning to navigate as well. But it's a really, really wonderful community with exceptional people, and I'm very lucky to serve them.
See, I guess that's one of the differences with non-American communities. America, most rabbis will avoid politics consciously. I often say that there were two words for many years I couldn't utter in my shul. One was Obama and the other was Trump, because no matter what I said, I would create controversy that wasn't necessary for shul life and wouldn't provide for growth. Whereas in other communities, the politics have become very, very important to the rabbinical role.
Correct. And there are ways that a rabbi can reflect on politics and trends on politics and behavior in politics without mentioning any names, and still deliver a nuanced message which can be appreciated on both sides of the aisle. In our particular community, there are people who I know go out to join demonstrations at the moment, and there are people who are being demonstrated against. There are friends of Putin and enemies of Putin. There are people who are involved in writing in Haaretz newspaper and people who are very disrespectful of Haaretz newspaper. And we're all together in shul. And on Shabbos, it's we can all sit together and we can be together as Sadash Lishit, and it's almost an island of Dukiyum in English, which is of coexistence, which is a wonderful thing, perhaps somewhat rare. It's a diverse community. But within that as well, I'll tell you a story. My first Pesach here, there were many English people in shul. Because of tourism, Pesach here is almost as big as Yom Kippur. And on Pesach, the Anglos in community reflected after my drasha that I was very political. And I said, what do you mean I was political? And then they said, you were political in Hebrew and not in English, because I speak 70% Hebrew, 30% English from the pulpit. And I said, what did I say that was political? And they said that you mentioned that although this year a few people tried to bring the Korban Pesach on Har HaBayit, next year, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will all bring the Korban Pesach on Har HaBayit. So I pointed out to them that I wasn't being political, I was being religious, and they said very similar things in their own Musaf prayers not long before. But it's true that in Israel, you can't say those kind of things and ignore the reality that you're living in the land that you're talking about, and that there are practical ramifications for your religious aspirations in a way where it's far, far closer to home than it was. I could have said the same words from the pulpit in Australia, but they have added and deeper meaning here.
I want to shift for a moment because the Mirvis name is very well known to many of us. There aren't too many people who can say, my father is a knight, commander of the Order of the British Empire. Your father is the chief rabbi of Great Britain, and your mother works alongside them. We've had the privilege of hosting both your father and your mother in our shul in Chicago. But but you've always grown up in a rabbinic family. And being born in Dublin, your father was the chief rabbi of Ireland beforehand in the Rav in Dublin before he moved over to England. What's it like being a son of a chief rabbi?
Well, first of all, Rabbi Matanki, you've done excellently in introducing me as the son of both of my parents. Not everyone remembers to do that. And whenever I'm introduced as my father's son, which I'm something very proud of, I mention that I also have a mother, and I'm equally proud of my mother as well. I don't know what it's like not to be the parent or the son of my parents. I've never tried anything else. But we're very, very proud of both of their achievements. There's only one, well, not one person, there's only one family where they can say that their father was made a KBE by King Charles, because my father was the only one on this list to receive. It wasn't just sir, but it was the highest level of knight, which was a very, very big honor for him. And I'd say that there's little I do in my life which isn't impacted in one way or another by my upbringing. You know, growing up in Ireland, I was the only religious Jew my age on the island. Each of my siblings had religious classmates. I didn't. There were 4 Jews my age, all boys. And I was raised with that sense of shlichut, that sense of, number one, we live in Israel, we're just here on holiday. That's the way we were raised. My parents are still on shlichut and it's still going well for them. But also that sense of being born in a certain place at a certain time with a responsibility to the community around you. And I think if there's one thing in particular I could really highlight as coming from my upbringing from my parents, it's that sense of responsibility and that sense of needing to do whatever you can for the benefit of those around you.
And your family is a long-term rabbinic family. Your grandfather, your father's father was also a Rav, and I believe also your great-grandfather, and I don't know the exact term, he was a minister in Johannesburg.
He was a reverend. He was a reverend.
And the difference between a reverend and a rabbi in South Africa,
It means you didn't necessarily formally have smicha, but you served in a rabbinic role in a community. It's almost, if you know the Smichas Chaver program, which is being run now in America. So it's to be a chaver. It's somebody on a level of a respected role in the community, but not necessarily having the official rabbinic ordination.
I understand in England, the tradition had been that there weren't people who were being ordained many years ago. People weren't ordained typically. They were given the title of reverend instead of rabbi. The chief rabbi.
It's a sign of respect, because you're not a mister, but you'd have to be a something. But it's a sign of respect for Klei Kodesh in a community. So
you're a long line of Klei Kodesh. And when you were growing up, you were the only one. You were the only observant Jew. When did you become part of a larger group? Was that when you moved first to Israel? When you went to Israel, or was there an earlier time, or England?
Well, I moved to London when I was 8.
Okay.
But once you've been born in Ireland, you can't say that you're English. I'm Irish. Having an Irish passport, it's St. Patrick's Day this week in a couple of days. There are certain things to be proud about being Irish. In relation to Israel, it's not always the proudest nationality to have. But
I don't know if you know this, but in Chicago, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, because we have such an Irish population, they dye the Chicago River green.
So I understand, yes. So some of us who have the green pneumius in our blood, we don't need to do it in that way. But yes, it was moving to London, I suppose, when I'd been exposed to a stronger religious community. It's the first time I saw Haredim, or people who looked like the people on Fiddler on the Roof. And but that Irish upbringing stayed with me in terms of, in England, the people I could have a chavruta with weren't necessarily the people who I'd feel comfortable with socially, because I'd feel that in terms of my identity, I'd need something broader. I couldn't just put myself in a particular niche group or a particular closed pocket of the community. I felt that as a person, I needed to belong somewhere broader, somewhere more diverse.
And has that's also then obviously informed your role as the deputy CEO of World Mizrachi, that you're not closed off in one small corner of the world, but serving the entire world.
I suppose geographically, it's a broad and diverse role. I'd say it has more to do with my role in Herzliya, in the shul here, because some people are surprised that I live here in Herzliya. It's not the natural choice for somebody necessarily with a kippah sruga. But I feel very comfortable around people who are different from me, because that's the way I was brought up. And I feel confident raising my children to be different from the people around them, and also to respect the many goods that they can, and good things they can learn from people around them, more so than I'd feel raising my children. I lived for 12 years in Alon Shvut in Yeshivat Har Etzion, which is a wonderful, idyllic life, but it's not where I'd want to raise my children. So I'd say in the Herzliya role, in terms of being part of a broader community with that greater diversity, I'd say that's where it really has its impact more.
And for many, many years, Mizrachi was always that bridge. I once had the privilege of having sitting next to Yosef Berg, who was the minister for many, many years, the head of the Mizrachi, the Mafdal, and he was trying to explain to me that Mizrachi was always in the ruling coalition because they always knew how to make the connections and to be the bridge with everyone else. Do you see Mizrachi, World Mizrachi, still being able to play that role? Because you have a role also within the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency, and there are strong competing visions in that. Is Mizrachi still positioned for that?
I think more than ever we're positioned. I think the distance is growing. There's increasing polarization in many areas of our lives, not just in the religious and the political spheres. There's a growing vacuum in the center. And I'd say more than ever, this is Mizrachi's hour to take leadership in that middle ground. And, the word Mizrachi comes from the words Merkaz Ruchani. We were the spiritual center. That was the group of people who believed in a religious role for the Zionist movement originally. And I believe that nowadays our role is to be that Merkaz Ruchani, perhaps not in the way it was initially intended, but to be there in the Merkaz. The center ground is thinning, people are moving to the extremes, and there are many people in the middle who may feel somewhat uncomfortable, somewhat homeless, who don't necessarily know how to define themselves. Rabbi Matanki, you and I are both alumni of Yeshivat Har Etzion, which provides us with a natural ideological home, I would say. And people in America may feel that way about Yeshiva University and whatever the strength of the American Jewish community. But elsewhere in the world, people don't necessarily have that identity or that institutional ideological home. And I think more than ever, Mizrachi can play that role.
But are we able to really communicate that? Is it something that's attractive, saying we're going to be walking the line, we're going to be the bridge? Or do people nowadays want to hear, no, we're taking a hard line this way or a hard line that way?
People want to hear a hard line, of course, and the media wants to show a hard line. And to a certain extent, it's difficult where your view on every difficult topic is, it's complex and there are nuances and there are different ways of looking at it, and ask your local rabbi. And to a certain extent, if we limit it to a more political sphere of statements, being in the middle has its challenges. It's easier to fly one flag, or Rosh Yeshiva of Liechtenstein Zatzal would say, and it's much harder to fly two flags in the middle. But being in the middle and having a complex view doesn't mean not having a view, and it doesn't mean being parav. We could be strong and confident in our centrism. I've never met a militant centrist, but if we're moderate in our moderation, we're in trouble. We have to be confident and strong in our centrism, and to try and create a thriving centrism where we're defining ourselves not just as a bridge between 2 points and how we relate between the 2 points, but by who we are in the middle and what we believe in and what we stand for.
And Rabbi Lam Zatzal used to talk about Torah u'madal lechatchila. He would talk about what we in the United States, what we refer to as modern Orthodoxy, which is not the same as religious Zionism, but close, that we have to take that position that it's not a compromise, but it's the way things should be. And being in the middle is not a compromise, but the way things should be. But it is a very hard sell.
It's a hard sell, and it's an educational challenge.
Who are our leadership today? If you were to think of rabbinic leadership, of Tzionut Hadatit, of Mizrahi, who would they be nowadays?
Officially speaking, in terms of Mizrahi, the ideology, or the world Mizrahi movement, I would say that the senior rabbinic leadership we turn to would be Rabbi Herschel Schachter in America, Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon in Israel, other Rabbanim as well on different issues. We're going to see at the Congress, which we're going to have after Yom Ha'atzmaut, chief rabbis from around the world. And there are different people who turn to in different parts of the world on different issues. We don't have a Lubavitcher Rebbe per se, or a Moetzes per se, in terms of a formal structure, which is both for good and for bad. But hopefully something that we as a movement can do as we grow is to provide a home, and within that leadership, create individuals across the world who people can identify with and feel, this is what I believe in and this is what I want to be.
Do you feel the challenge is bigger in Israel, or the challenge is bigger in the diaspora, or it's all just a challenge?
Which challenge? Israel has its
trying to convince people to be in the middle.
I would say there are different challenges. I don't think we have to convince people to be in the middle. I think we have a tremendous number of low-hanging fruit, where it's something that I know Rabbi Dr. Jacob J. Schachter speaks about, and it's a term which is being used by others now, which is kiruv krovim. You know, the number of people we're losing in the center is perhaps greater than any number we're attracting from beyond our natural communities. And we need to engage in kiruv krovim. It's not necessarily about convincing people to be in the middle ground, but it's more about maintaining the middle ground and strengthening the middle ground and creating a level of confidence and pride about the middle ground, as you said. In many ways, I don't know where's easier, reflecting on my own personal role. I think Israel's just got such amazing potential. You know, for me, Yom Kippur was a turning point, because up to Yom Kippur in my community, I knew who I knew and I didn't know who I didn't know. My Hatzliya Pituach world was fairly narrow. Post Yom Kippur, people stop me in the streets and they say, were you that person who we heard on Yom Kippur, or are you that guy who we saw in Shul? And there's just so many Jews here. It's amazing. There are so many low-hanging fruit, and they want to connect. That doesn't mean they want to come to Shul and put on tefillin straight away, but they want to connect and they want to be involved and they want to engage. And there's so much to work with in Israel. If you can almost forget about the definitions and the politics for a moment and just reflect on the people, I think there's so much to work with here in Israel. In many ways, it should be an easier role in Israel, just because of the number of people and the desire to connect, and the ease with which I think we can do so.
I believe it or not, Rabbi Mirvis, our time is up. And I want to thank you for this fascinating conversation of this past half hour. Normally, when we see each other, there are so many other things running around that we haven't had a chance to schmooze with this and to reflect. And your thoughts and your reflections are truly meaningful and inspiring at the same time. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon at the Congress. I encourage people to join us. It's not too late to sign up. They can just go on the Mizrahi website, the World Mizrahi website, to be able to sign up. Yom Ha'atzmaut, the 75th, only comes once. And so if you're able to join, it would be really, truly meaningful and important. And thank you for your leadership and for all of your time. Have a wonderful—
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. A pleasure to be with you, and congratulations to you, and thank you to you for everything you're doing for your local community, for Chicago, for the religious Zionists of America, and for the Jewish world. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thank you. Have a good day.